Welcome everyone who's already on the call. Just going to give a little bit of time for everybody else to arrive.
If anyone wants to grab a drink while they're waiting, feel free to grab a tea or a coffee or a glass of wine or a pint. We're still climbing.
I love that the first question was, I've got my box of wine, so we're all good.
Oh, I've just seen that. Box of wine a night at the moment, is it? Right. Okay. So we're 3 minutes past 6. Are we all ready to, should we kick off? Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So hello everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight on the first virtual mindfulness event that we're running. So I'm Sandra Patel-Stewart, CEO and founder of Transition Partners. During lockdown, we've been running quite a lot of these virtual events. So if you don't follow us already, follow us on LinkedIn and you can see our event schedule. Feel free to sign up to any more of our events. The reason I reached out to Mark to start running this event, and hopefully we'll be running this as a series if we get some positive feedback from some of you lovely lot today, is that I, for one, and I know that a lot of people are in the same boat, I've been really struggling, if I'm honest, during lockdown. I run a business, my husband runs a business, I've got a 5-year-old at home and 2 dogs, 2 little yappy dogs, and it's just been a particularly challenging time, and particularly over the last couple of weeks I've really struggled. So I'm really hoping that you guys can take some valuable tools away from this evening session, and I really hope that this session helps you in the future. So on that note, we've got Mark McCordy, who is the CEO of The Conscious Leader. Mark is here this evening to talk to us about what tools we can use and how we can help manage our minds and the stress of it all during this difficult time. And Mark is also going to practice some mindfulness with us all tonight, which will be interesting. With Mark, we have Vicky Curtis, and Vicky Curtis is going to help a little bit later on with some of the questions. Vicky and Mark both train together with a company called Search Inside Yourself. Search Inside Yourself have worked with Google for over 10 years, and they've helped with them with all their mindfulness training. So also, please note that you've got a chat box and a Q&A box. If you can feel free to, to chat amongst yourselves in the chat box, but if you can, any questions, if you can use the Q&A box, we will be holding about 15-20 minutes at the end of the session to go through any questions. And don't worry, if we run out of time, Mark has kindly offered to reach out to you directly to go through any questions or anything else that you want to cover. So hope you enjoy the evening. I hope you all get something from it. And I'll hand you over to Mark.
Thank you, Sandra. So I'm going to share screen in a second, but just to say Vicky's along for this as well, and will hopefully help, even though that you're muted, we can make this reasonably interactive and get a sense of, yeah, just make it a little bit more interactive. So let me just start by sharing my screen. And so hopefully you can see that okay. So thanks to Sandra for the invitation to take part in this session, but also thank you to Tony Kokoza, who made the introduction for us to be doing this. So we have Tony to thank also for this session tonight. Just to say a little bit about mindfulness in tech, that's a particular focus for this. Just really want to check in, and maybe you can start registering your answers on the Q&A box about what's brought you to this session. I mean, Sandra said something about what's brought her to this session and her motivation for setting up this session, but just what comes up for you in response to this question? Why are you here? Why have you tuned into this particular session? What are you hoping to get from it? And I'm going to rely on Vicky and perhaps Sandra just to share what's coming up.
Well, our fastest typer said some stress release tools. So kind of like that practicality, pragmatic. How do I manage everything? Being a mom, being a business owner, juggling. How do we manage stress? How do we focus on work at the moment? Balancing all that work-life balance during lockdown, and some motivation to kind of begin to deal with it all, I think, are some of the themes that are coming through, some of the points I'm picking up. To gain skills to switch off.
Gaining skills to switch off. Difficult to stay
motivated, yeah.
During being
I want to keep my team sane.
How do I stay
manager? How do I stay positive while looking for work in a difficult market? Lacking proper social interaction. That's a really big thing that I'm hearing from lots of people, especially with a more extroverted tendency. That lack of being able just to meet people in the same way that we would do if we were face to face.
So I'm hearing maybe a few themes here. So certainly there's something about stress and tools to deal with stress. There's certainly something about focus, about when we've got so many distractions going on, how can we focus? But also then it sounds like there's something about just how we relate to one another, particularly when we're relating in the format we're in at the moment. And that seems to be the default mode, and it may be for a while yet. But how we're relating to each other, and also then how do we relate to lumps and bumps in the road? Because I don't know about you, they're happening every day. Some of those around homeschooling, some of them around other stuff, but it's just all of that, right? So I'm pleased to say you're in the right place. That's the stuff that Vicky and I work with within the program that the mindfulness program that we teach, and it's been around for a long time within Google, and it's been going to lots of other tech businesses, which we'll talk about in a bit. So welcome, you're in the right place. Here's a slide that might give you a sense of, I don't know, I mean, it might speak to that a little bit. You know, I mean, I don't know if this resonates. I mean, you might not be in an office, but there can be a sense of like, you know, inputs coming in from everywhere. And not just inputs from work, it's kind of like, and actually now the home work life has blended so much, there's all other kinds of distractions coming in. So, you know, I think it's fair to say that I think you'd have to be superhuman not to, for everybody to be feeling more of the stress of it, you know, in this COVID-19 period. You know, we could go quite deep around it in terms of saying, you know, what's actually going on at a societal level in terms of shock and trauma, but that's certainly in the system. So everybody experiences that. And some people are touched by it more personally than others. So that's going on for all of us, and how that impacts on the workplace, employment. So, you know, there's a lot of it about, a lot of stress about. And I guess that really speaks to this second slide, which is, you know, it's not personal, it's societal. We're in a context and a system right now where, you know, VUCA, you might have come across the phrase before, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You know, before COVID-19, there was a different big wave of disruption hitting, which was called Brexit. That was creating a lot of disruption for a lot of us. And before that, there was digitization, and there's all other kinds of waves, you know, and there'll still be other waves coming, like global warming, all of which that impact on our lives and at some level impact that. So this is what we're working with at the moment. And COVID-19 is just a very, very particular form of disruptive wave, but it impacts all of us. Just to say a little bit about this, you know, there was a piece of research. So the question is if you've got all these waves hitting, how do I relate to the wave? I mean, one way to relate to the wave is just to have it crash over you and crush you. And there are other ways of relating to big waves, which is what this slide's demonstrating. So this can relate to the our state of mind, and then how we react and respond to big waves that come our way. So one of the things that's linked to that, this is a piece of research that came from Harvard, and the piece of research was actually titled "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." And what it was pointing to is, you know, we all have a human mind, and because we all have a human mind, there's something that's pretty certain, which is our minds wander. It's natural, it's human. So probably about half the time, we're meant to be focusing on one thing in front of us, but our mind's actually doing something else. It's thinking about the future, the past, it's going off into abstract ideas. And that wouldn't be such an issue. And of course, there are benefits to that, but it wouldn't be such an issue unless one of the things they found in the research was often when our mind is going to the future and the past, it's going into worry about the future and anxiety, or it's going into rumination about the past. So consequently, when our mind's wandering, it's unhappy. The other thing they found was that for leaders, and a number of you spoke about some of the challenges it presents for you in leading teams, is that it's really difficult to pay attention in meetings, which when you've got really important meetings going on, that's kind of important, because you might be missing stuff right in the middle of a meeting just because your mind's in the last meeting you just came out of, or the one you're going to next. And then really something around, and given all of that, very few people do anything to improve that, to improve the situation. So this is where we're finding mindfulness, particularly in the workplace, is coming in, because a few of you mentioned at the outset, this is about focus, our ability to focus when there are lots of distractions coming in. So I'll tell you a bit more about mindfulness in a bit, but rather than kind of like just drone on and on and on about it, why don't we have an experience of it? Because it's something it's more difficult to describe than it is to experience, actually. So if you're up for it, let's do something they teach at Google, which is called attention training. So it'll be a short practice. It'll be it'll be less than 10 minutes. But just find a place you can be comfortable for the next 10 minutes. And if it's comfortable for you, well, first of all, just focus on your posture. So if you can, whatever you're sitting on, if you are, maybe come away from the back of the chair so your back's free supporting. And find a place you can find a good solid connection with the floor, so both soles of the feet on the floor. And might just have a sense of your posture. So have a sense of maybe like a stack of pound coins going up from the base of the spine up to the crown of the head. So you're kind of really elongating out, but also at the same time, finding a place you can relax and let go. So maybe just attending to how your shoulders are and letting go of those a little bit more. And if it's comfortable for you, gently closing the eyes or softening the gaze, whatever works best for you. I'm going to close my eyes. So we're going to engage in an attention training practice, and this practice is just doing something really simple, but not necessarily easy, which is just paying attention to the breath. So just turning your attention inward now and becoming aware that you're breathing. So wherever the breath shows up most vividly for you, so it might be in the abdomen or the chest or even at the nostrils. So as best you can, paying attention to the physical sensations of breathing as the breath moves in and out of the body. So you might notice the slight rise and fall of the abdomen with each in-breath, with each out-breath. Or you might notice the slight rise and fall of the chest with each in-breath and with each out-breath. Or you might have a sense of the breath passing over the nostrils. So noticing the breath at the nostrils with each in-breath and with each out-breath. So just finding a place you can tune into the physical sensations of breathing as the breath moves in and out of the body. And as best you can, paying attention to the full duration of the in-breath and the full duration of the out-breath. So you might just try counting breaths. So breathing in and breathing out, 1. And breathing in and breathing out, 2. And just keep counting breaths. And if you find that you lose count, then be kind to yourself and just start again from 1. And if you want to let go of counting breaths, you can do that and just be guided by my voice. So just, again, continuing to follow the breath, allowing the attention to ride on the breath. Again, paying attention to the physical sensations of each in-breath and each out-breath. Just allowing the breath to breathe itself. So you don't need to breathe in any particular way. Your body knows just how to do this. And there's no need to fix or change anything here. So just allowing your experience to be your experience. And if you find that the mind wanders, well, it's just what minds do. It's not a mistake or a fault. So just gently noticing where the mind's gone to. So it might be thinking or planning or whatever. And then just escorting the attention back to the breath and the sensations of breathing. Just this breath. And this one. Just this. And again, if the mind wanders, just noticing where it's gone to. Maybe thoughts about the future or the past. Wherever it's gone, just noticing where it's gone and just escorting the attention back to the breath and the sensations of breathing. So breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. In, out. And then again, becoming aware of where the feet make contact with the floor. Becoming aware of where the body makes contact with the chair. And also perhaps becoming aware of hands, shoulders, head. And when you're ready, gently opening the eyes. So now you know about mindfulness. That's a short practice that's the core training at the program they've been teaching in Google for over 10 years. It's a simple practice to focus on the breath. It's not to say that it's necessarily easy. You might have noticed your mind wandering. And there are variations on practices where we attend to different things and train our attention on different things like the body or the breath. But this is about training attention. So usually if we were doing this interactively in a room, we would kind of check in with some of your experience, but just to share something that might resonate for you in terms of what might have been going on there. So the first thing is you'll have noticed that my invitation was to invite you to follow the breath. And then after a while, you may have been following the breath, whether that had been in the abdomen, the chest, or the nostrils. And then you might have noticed a distraction. And maybe just on the Q&A box, if anybody just wants to say if they noticed, if their mind got distracted away from the breath, and if so, what to? And there could be all sorts of things in there. It could be like I get distracted because I hear a noise and suddenly my mind's not on the breath, it's on a noise. Or I get distracted because I'm noticing the pain in my lower back. Or I get distracted because my mind's wandered off to what I'm meant to be cooking for tea tonight. Or my mind wanders off to something that happened earlier on today. But either way, a distraction comes in and it takes me away from this present moment experience. So I'm just wondering, Vicky or Sandra, then in terms of Q&A boxes, we're seeing people, I think, registering, what were people being distracted by?
Well, go on, Sandra.
Well, I kept thinking about my son because it's tea time and thinking I've got bedtime to do after this and then work, and my mind just kept wandering. We've had one of the participants cried. Someone was thinking about walking their dog. Another got an email alert, barbecue. One's hungry. Children screaming at each other. Yeah, I can listen in the background. I almost fell asleep. Like I feel like I've relaxed, and which is great, but my mind did wander.
Yeah. So all kinds of distractions come in, and I just really want to say for that person that said they cried, that's not uncommon for people to kind of say they feel a bit sleepy, because the bottom line is we're just pausing. And when we're living in an environment where it's just constant 24/7, to stop and just check in with ourselves can be really powerful in itself. And then whatever's distracted us, whether it's a strong emotion, a thought, or whatever, we can come back to what's often referred to as an anchor breath. It anchors us back into the present moment. So for some of you, hopefully you will have noticed that you'd become distracted. And then we're able to bring your attention back to breathing. Simple move, but not always easy. So you reorientate your attention, you come back to the breath. And, you know, there is no magical art around meditation. I mean, this process flow, surprise, surprise, was developed at Google for a bunch of engineers, software engineers, because this is the thing that goes on in mindfulness practice hundreds and thousands of times. The really cool thing about it is, like anything that you practice, whether if any of you play a musical instrument or play any kind of sport, I mean, you know, golf swing or playing the guitar, the more you practice, the better you get. And in this case, what you're training are the attentional control centers of the brain. So every time you notice the mind wandering and you bring it back, it's the equivalent of doing a repetition in the gym with a barbell. But what you're training is attentional control. So hopefully you would have noticed that as in this last process. And so that's kind of what's in play. And then just to say a little bit of a definition about mindfulness, hopefully some of you might have just accessed something that was a little bit calmer. So it's a bit like the snow globe when there's a lot going on, it's all shaking around. And when we just pause, things can just settle down a little bit. And so mindfulness, a working definition is you can become more aware of things. You can become more aware of strong emotions. You can become more aware of things that you need to do next, or things that are just, you know, just by stopping you and checking in with yourself, you can become more aware. You can become more aware of yourself. You can become more aware of key relationships. You can become more aware of what's going on around you, but you can generate awareness out of this. And it comes from paying attention, as we've said. So it's attention training on purpose. So we're intentionally, in this case, saying we're paying attention to the breath. And every time we choose to set our attention to follow the breath, we notice the mind wander, then we come back. So it's purposeful training. In the present moment, one of the really cool things about the breath is you can't breathe in the past or the future. It's always anchoring you into the here and now. So that bit about the wandering mind is an unhappy mind. When it's really focused on the breath, you just are. There's no thinking about, you know, I know the mind wanders, but then you bring it back. Yeah? So it's bringing you back to present moment. And then a key thing that we would develop more on a mindfulness program, which is really transformational, is cultivating this quality that if I've noticed my mind wandered, I could really be quite harsh with myself and say, how stupid am I? I can't even follow my breath. Or I could develop a very kind relationship to that, which says, okay, my mind's wandered off to something important and now I'm going to bring it back. So we start to train this attitudinal quality to meet our experience with kindness and curiosity. And oh, a strong emotion just came up. What's that about? And can I be kind in that moment around what's going on for me? So we start to develop a way of meeting our experience, which is really supportive and kind. Much like we might have experienced that same kind of attention from a good friend. We start to develop that for ourselves. So I'm going to stop talking about it and I want to play a clip from somebody who will say something more about the science of it all.
There's no way a fidgety and skeptical news anchor would ever have started meditating were it not for the science. The science is really compelling. It shows that meditation can boost your immune system, lower your blood pressure, help you deal with problems ranging from irritable bowel syndrome to psoriasis. And the neuroscience is where it really gets sci-fi. There was a study out of Harvard that shows that short daily doses of meditation can literally grow the gray matter in key areas of your brain having to do with self-awareness and compassion, and shrink the gray matter in the area associated with stress. There was also a study out of Yale that looked at what's called the default mode network of the brain. It's a connected series of brain regions that are active during most of our waking hours when we're doing that thing that human beings do all the time, which is obsessing about ourselves, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, doing anything but being focused on what's happening right now. Meditators not only turn off the default mode network of their brain while they're meditating, but even when they're not meditating. In other words, meditators are setting a new default mode. And what's that default mode? They're focused on what's happening right now. In sports, this is called being in the zone. It's nothing mystical. It's not magical. You're not floating off into cosmic ooze. You are just being where you are. The cliche in self-help circles is being in the now. You can use that term if you want, but because it's accurate, it's slightly annoying, but it's accurate. It's more just being focused on what you're doing. And the benefits of that are enormous. And this is why you're seeing these unlikely meditators now, why you're seeing the U.S. Marines adopting it, the U.S. Army, corporate executives from the head of Ford to the founders of Twitter, athletes from Phil Jackson to many, many Olympians, scientists, doctors, lawyers, school children. There's this sort of elite subculture of high achievers who are adopting this because they know it can help you be more focused on what you're doing, and it can stop you from being yanked around by the voice in your head. My powers of prognostication are not great. I bought a lot of stock in the company that made Palm Pilot back in 2000, and that didn't go so well for me. But having said that, I'm going to make a prediction. I think we're looking at meditation as the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told people that you went running, they would say, who's chasing you? Right now, if you tell people you meditate, and I have a lot of experience with telling people this, they're going to look at you like you're a little weird most of the time. That's going to change. Meditation is going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like exercise, brushing your teeth, and taking the meds that your doctor prescribes to you. These are all things that if you don't do, you feel guilty about. And that is where I think we're heading with meditation, because the science is so strongly suggestive that meditation can do really, really great things for your brain and for your body. The common assumption that we have, and it may be subconscious, is that our happiness really depends on external factors. How was our childhood? Have we won the lottery recently? Did we marry well? Did we marry at all? But in fact, meditation suggests that happiness is actually a skill, something you can train just the way you can train your body in the gym. It's a self-generated thing. And that's a really radical notion. It doesn't mean that external circumstances aren't going to impact your happiness. It doesn't mean you're not going to be subject to the vagaries of an impermanent entropic universe. It just means you were going to be able to navigate this with a little bit more ease.
So there's a story about Dan Harris. He used to be, and I think still is, he's a news anchor on US TV. And the thing that brought him to meditation was he had a very public meltdown live on TV. So he really had a very strong stress reaction, and that's what brought him to discover about meditation. And, you know, he speaks very well about the benefits of it. I'm just going to expand on that a bit, but then what I want to do is allow plenty of time for some questions. But just to say what's some of the neuroscience that goes on here. So for those of you in the business world, you don't need to look very far these days. Here's one from Harvard Business Review, and I'll send you this slide deck so you can look for yourself and research a bit more. But Dan Goleman's piece around mindfulness, and really that is based on this book that he wrote with the neuroscientist Richard Davidson, and basically he's pointing to many things. But when you go through all the research that's been going on over the last 10 years, which has been huge, it really boils down to three core areas where it's rock solid in terms of the research. One is what we've focused on so far, which is about focus, our ability to focus and train attention, but also working memory capacity. And working memory capacity is a bit like, you know, if you've ever had one of those days where you just feel really full up and you can't take in any more problem solving, well, that's working memory capacity. But there's also an affective dimension of it. So maybe if you've had one of those days where you've just felt really full up, and then maybe a team member's come along and they've just said something that any other point in time it wouldn't be an issue, but just on this occasion, it's just like they got both barrels. That's working memory capacity. You know, it's like that expression, the straw that broke the camel's back. That's when you're a limit. So mindfulness really helps with that, as well as focus. Then there's other things that we'll talk about in terms of stress management and resilience. But also, when you're taking care of your autonomic nervous system, it impacts on the way that if you're constantly in a threat response, you're not going to be very empathic. If you're constantly in a threat response and really stressed out, it's probably going to stress out some of your relationships. And then in a business environment, that impacts on collaboration, and therefore that impacts on innovation and the way that teams work together effectively. So this is what some of the research is showing. Just to say a little bit more very briefly about each of those. So Dan mentioned about the default mode network. This is the mode that our mind's usually in when we're just at rest. And as he was saying, our brain has a tendency just to get into internal narrative, self-referential thinking, you know, about, oh, I wonder what that person thought of me in the last meeting. And, oh, I wonder, you know, so we just get into this inner narrative about ourselves and our place in the world. And often that can be linked with rumination about stuff that happened in the past, or it can be worrying about us and in the future that hasn't yet come. What Dan was pointing to is that during meditation, that whole system is less active. But also what's really cool is that even when experienced meditators aren't meditating, it's less active and have more capacity to self-regulate in terms of the attentional management regions of the brain. So if you do those mindfulness of breathing exercises enough, you'll be able to know when your mind has wandered and bring it back. So you start to, as Dan was saying, rewire the default mode network. So you can pay attention on purpose. Learning to follow your breath is a remarkably unspectacular feat. If, as a consequence, you develop attentional control, if you're trying to write a really important strategy paper and you can actually focus, that has big benefits. The other thing around stress is when they did, so some of you might know the amygdala is the part of the brain that's associated with fight or flight. It's really important to respond to threats. So, if I stick my finger on a hot kettle, it's important my amygdala is working, because then my finger will give me a signal to say, take your finger off the kettle. But if the amygdala is chronically activated, it means that even when threats aren't around, we're worrying about stuff that we really don't have to. So they did this particular study where they put a thermode on the skin of the participants, and then just every now and again transmitted heat into the skin, which was uncomfortable. Now, experienced meditators weren't superhuman. When that heat transmitted into their body, they had amygdala activation. But what was really interesting was to find when they converted novice meditators and experienced meditators was that experienced meditators didn't experience as much anticipatory stress. So this is the bit that when heat was being pumped into their skin, okay, when it was there, it was uncomfortable and the amygdala was firing. But when it wasn't there, they weren't worrying about the next hit of uncomfortableness. They also had faster recovery. So when the heat had gone, they weren't left with the after effects of it so much. And I don't think it takes too much to kind of think about, when a stressor's there in the workplace, be able to respond to it, but then can you let it go when it's gone? And I think for many of us, a lot of the stress comes from anticipating stuff that hasn't yet happened and from ruminating about stuff that's long since finished. That's really debilitating. So if you can learn to train the mind in this way, you can experience less anticipatory stress and you can recover more quickly from stressors. So that's when we start talking about resilience, this bounce back ability from stressors. And then finally, just to say something about mindfulness and relationships and innovation. So this is another Harvard Business Review article, which you are more than welcome to have a look up. And here it references a couple of things that we'll say a little bit more about. One is psychological safety, which I'll say more about. And the other thing is just it references a particular mindfulness practice, which was taught at Google, which is part of the program that Vicky and I teaches. So just to say a little bit more about that. So the program that Vicky and I deliver, and we've delivered it in a range of settings, but just more recently we've delivered it in a government department of all places. But its original format developed originally it was developed in bite-sized chunks that Googlers did for a couple of hours every week over 8 weeks. And then they thought, well, that's kind of hard to do. We'll put it together as a 2-day program. And it's been delivered to thousands of Googlers. And as it says there, it focuses on emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and also then brings in the neuroscience. Particularly in a virtual environment, that's now been reconfigured back to its original format and breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. But the bottom line is the program looks at things like through mindfulness kind of develop greater self-awareness. If I get triggered by stuff, if I'm more self-aware, can I learn how to manage myself more skillfully and strong emotions and reactions? But also it starts to look at if we start to calm our body and mind, and if we start to really listen to other people in a mindful way, can we deepen the level of empathy with other people in teams, at work or at home? And when we're really listening deeply to people, what kind of safety does that create for others to know that they can be heard? And when in the workplace where we're looking at diversity and inclusion and really looking to leverage cognitive diversity of teams, that matters. It really matters in terms of innovation and getting everybody's best thinking out on the table. So the other thing the program looks at is how to have difficult conversations. Well, you know, those kind of conversations that we put off, but really we need to have to clear the air. And it also looks at something called compassionate leadership, which those of you who will be familiar with Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn will know that that's at the core of LinkedIn's culture. And Jeff Weiner is very public. If you go on LinkedIn Learning and do a search around this, he's very public about how it's contributed to their exponential growth. So that's the program. And on that program, they teach a particular practice called Just Like Me. And this is a practice where in this article, it refers to how that has contributed in Google to developing psychological safety and how that impacts on innovation. So just to say a bit about that, some of you might be familiar with Google and Project Aristotle, which is where they found psychological safety was the #1 factor differentiating the highest performing teams. So when people are more mindful and they show up in a way which is more receptive and listening more, it creates psychological safety. And that matters. It matters in terms of teams feeling like they want to step forward and find their voice and share their best thinking. That work all is based on very rigorous research from Harvard, from Professor Amy Edmondson. And, you know, the heart of psychological safety is a perception in a team that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And the bottom line is it enables healthy risk-taking, innovation. And the bottom line for me is this last bit. You know, does it feel safe to stick my neck out in this team without fear of having it cut off? So if you can create those kind of conditions within a team, surprise, surprise, you get astonishing levels of innovation. And this is what they found at Google. And then, you know, something else Vicky and I do, we're working in partnership with Professor Amy Edmondson and the Phyllis Organisational Scan. You can measure all of this. You can measure how safe a team feels in terms of inclusion and diversity, attitudes to risk and failure, how willing team members are to help, and how open conversations are. So you can measure all this stuff. But mindfulness is one of the ways in which you can develop psychological safety in a team. It's not the only way, but it's a way. So just to come back a little bit to talk about mindfulness training. So this stuff's been showing up a lot. You know, thousands of employees have been trained at Google, but also SAP. So many of you be familiar with SAP. Peter Bosselman trained in the same way that Vicky and I did, took it back to SAP. As it says here, I mean, he's been piloted in 2013. And the bottom line is employees are more healthy and more engaged, and they can cope better with a changing world. So when these next waves crash in, at SAP, they know that this equips their employees to deal with them better. And that's why they're rolling it out in a big scale. So SAP rolling out mindfulness training to 22,000 German staff. You know, they've already trained at this point in time, when this was written, they'd already trained 6,500 and had 5,500 on a waiting list. So that's a lot of people in a corporate environment training in mindfulness. Why? Because of this. This is the stuff they've been measuring at SAP. So you can see big shifts there in terms of well-being, the meaning that people derive from work, their ability to focus, creativity, stress levels down, impact on relationships. So this stuff, you know, I mean, SAP, they're not stupid. They know that this stuff matters. It's important that it matters in terms of well-being, but it matters in terms of high-functioning organizations. And here's another organization that knows all about this. So Toto Wolff has been meditating for some time, and now he's training all 1,000 staff at Mercedes F1. So all the stuff we've talked about in terms of focus, resilience, mindfulness is not about being slow. Quite the opposite, and Toto Wolff will tell you that. It's really about getting you in the optimum position to really focus on what you need to focus on. Be well and resilient in high stress environments, and to really collaborate well and have good relationships with those you're working with. So I'm going to pause there. I think we've got about 15 minutes left for questions. I'm conscious I raced on through quite a few of those. So now really we have lots of space and time to kind of take any questions, and I want to bring Vicky back in. So we'll go to, I'm going to stop sharing screen for the moment. And then if we need to bring any slides back, we can do, but let's tune into some questions now. So just
Well, just while everybody's getting their questions together, I was really struck by some of the answers to your question, Sandra, about how many people currently meditate. And we had a real range of responses from some that do some meditation, but are still finding, you know, the information really interesting. And some kind of, I've done a little bit, but I've lapsed, you know, I find myself a bit inconsistent. It's the consistency. And then another lovely kind of thread around, well, actually I run and I do yoga and I've tried Headspace. So I was just really drawn to the different ways of being able to quieten that narrative network and get into that more direct sensory experience. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Mark, in relation to mindfulness.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the point in time we're at, right, with mindfulness, which is, it's a bit like Dan Harris was saying. You know, it's been around long enough now. I mean, Google have been teaching this stuff for over 10 years. SAP have been doing this since 2013. Headspace has been around a long time. In some senses, what we're teaching is nothing new. But for some people, it's still downright weird. You know, and that's the bit that I like about, you know, I'll send you the slides on this, but Peter Bosselman at SAP saying it's like the new jogging. You know, and that's what Dan Harris was saying, which is it becomes a no-brainer. You know, we take care of our physical bodies. Now we're just starting to get to a point where we're looking at how we take care of our minds. And people will be at different points with that. For some of you, you may be already getting on quite nicely with Headspace and finding it really resourceful. And I know that's something, Vicky, you know, you can relate to in terms of your journey with Headspace. Might invite you to say whatever you want about, but you know, Headspace is but they're not the only app. And then for others, they'll find other ways to de-stress, and you might be running or whatever. But there's something it's not to dismiss physical exercise or other things that take your mind off worrying about stuff, but there's something very specific about mindfulness training, which changes the structure and function of the brain. So what Dan Harris was describing in terms of changing the grey matter of the brain. So
I do use Headspace. There are other apps available in other good app stores, but I often think that when you're doing a guided meditation, it's really important to like the voice that's guiding you. And I do like Andy Puddingham's The Voice on Headspace. I find it really good when there's a lot of distractions going on and I know that I need a little bit of extra help focusing, having him guide me through. Very often in the heady days when I used to get on a train, that might be my time. And they also do running meditation recordings as well. So actually you can really get focused on how to access that mindfulness focus when you're running, if you want to kind of really just increase that direct sensory experience. Speaking about the heady days of getting on trains, one of our questions was around, is there a better time to meditate? What's the best time? And how do you get into more of a routine, Mark?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to answer that, but also please do keep on feeding me questions, and Vicky, do feel free to answer some of these as well. But I noticed a question come up, I think from Rob, about psychological safety. So we'll come back to that as well. Yeah. But let's just talk about practicalities of developing a practice. You know, we all each have different lives, and we have different patterns in terms of our own biorhythms. So for me, it's about finding a place in your day where you can shoehorn this in. For me, particularly, I mean, I've got twin 8-year-old boys, and when they were younger, I mean, I'm not an early morning person. so me getting up, trying to get up before they did when they were younger, no chance. But what I found was that actually once we put them to bed, at like 7 or 8 o'clock, then there was stillness in the house. And actually when they were very young, I used to sit in their nursery and meditate in there with them while they were asleep. And it'll be different things for different people. So it might be at the front end of the day and that really sets people up for the day, or it might be at the end of the day. And some people meditate before they go to sleep because it just quietens down the busy mind and they can get a better night's sleep. But then it's also finding a space you can practice in. So is there a place where some people buy a mat or a cushion and that place starts to represent something. It's like where they go to kind of be that snow globe. So it's finding a place. Vicky, is there anything for you, in terms of developing a practice or?
Well, I just so my time is early in the morning because nobody wants to get up in our house. So I find a delicious little slice of 45 minutes where I can just sneak downstairs and get some quiet time. And that's typically when I would practice. But there's a lovely question from Paul around, if I wanted to try this with squads or peers, when's the best time of day to do that? And I was mindful of leading some meditation the last time that I worked in-house in an organization in Nuffield Health. And it was less about the time of day, but it was more about establishing a regular routine. So it was, kind of either every day or on a day at a specific time. We always booked a room out, and that's where we went. So sometimes it might just be me in a room. Other times there might be 12, 15 of us. But that was the space that was carved out for people to come together to practice together. And there is something really quite lovely about that practicing together.
Yeah, and other things to say around that. I mean, at Google, they taught this program for a long time, and then it became so big that basically people just would, well, two things. One is they'd have recorded meditations in each of their meeting rooms that they could play before, short meditations before meetings. But more than that, in lunch breaks, people would just spontaneously arrange for people to sit together and meditate together. So you can see how this can really start to shape a culture. And, I'm aware, I do quite a lot of work with Henley Business School, and I know at Henley Business School, they arrange something as part of their well-being, that on a weekly basis, somebody arranged some time and space on a lunch break, and they play a guided meditation, and they all sit together. And it's part of their well-being. It's how they take care of themselves when they're working in a busy schedule. So I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 6 minutes. I want to come back to this psychological safety thing, call it out as something a bit distinct, but I want to respond to Rob's question. I might just go back to the slides if that's okay. So hopefully you can see that. So psychological safety and the psychological safety index is something we work at. Vicky and I also work in partnership with Amy Edmondson at Harvard. So this is a separate thing that if you're interested, follow up with us afterwards, in terms of emails. It's a measure that measures these dimensions, and we can do training once we've measured it to shift the dial on it. And some of those are interpersonal practices in teams about how you give everybody equal space within a team meeting, turn taking, but also then it's about the quality of listening that you extend. And one of the things we train on Searching Inside Yourself could be called mindful listening, but it's just learning to pay that same attention that you did on the breath to another human being, and not to interrupt them, and to communicate something qualitatively about encouraging them to say more. And in some circles, this is called generative attention. Funny thing is when you get teams that start to create that space in team meetings, they start to do astonishing levels of thinking together. Their levels of innovation go through the roof. So part of that is about teaching practices, but the other part are the inner practices that has a leader that shows up really calm and really open, and really communicating that they want to hear very diverse thinking and can then integrate that into very robust solutions. And so we teach the inner and the outer practices that enable leaders to do that. And that's why there's no coincidence that a lot of training went on in Google around this stuff, around mindfulness. And they've got a lot of leaders that can show up and create safe spaces for high levels of innovation. So, we work with both dimensions. So if that's something that's of interest to you in terms of your organisation and teamwork, then do follow up. Actually, sorry,
go on.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, sorry to move around a little bit. I just wanted to share screen again. And just really, because we are almost at time, I mean, we can probably run over. I don't mind staying on a bit if there are more questions, but the contact details are on the slide deck. We'll send those out. So if you have any questions beyond today, do feel free to reach out, and Vicky or I will follow up with you. But also did just want to make sure that, again, just to really thank Tony for setting this up. I think, Tony, you're on this call, so thank you once again. This wouldn't be happening without you. And yeah, so where are we at time? We've got a few more minutes, so I'll take share screen off and just say if there are any other questions that people want to ask, and we can stay on a bit longer.
There were a couple of things, Mark, that's worth just mentioning. There was a request about the books, that we'd mentioned a couple of books, so perhaps we could make us a couple of suggestions following this of things that people would like to pick up. And somebody referenced an article that I was reading earlier on today about distraction as a way of kind of escaping discomfort. I think that was Harvard Business Review report. So maybe we can share a couple of things that you might want to do to read around. A question here around, I find it difficult to take short pauses during the day. So my mind gets busier and busier. And as the end of the day goes on, you know, kind of what do I do to break that cycle? And I was kind of thinking about my own practice. So I have developed the knack of professionally hiding for 10 to 15 minutes in between meetings. So I'll book a meeting with myself, or pretend it's with Mark or somebody else, and that'll be the time that I put on. But it's even trying to make the most of those snippets of times, you know, making a cup of tea, boiling a kettle, can just give you that time to kind of just do even a couple of minutes reset. 3 deep breaths will do an awful lot to help that kind of ongoing feeling of getting faster and faster and faster during the day.
And it's a great point around that, which is, you know, with so much stimulus around us all day, it can really start to impact our sympathetic nervous system, which is our ability to respond to threats. And if it just keeps on going, we just get revved up more and more and more. So, you know, sorry about the metaphor, but Formula One Mercedes, you know, those cars don't go around the track indefinitely at that speed. They come in for a pit stop for a good reason. So actually doing short practices is like taking a pit stop, because otherwise the wheels and the tires are going to give way. And you know, so within Search Inside Yourself or any meditation program, they'll teach short practices to do, as Vicky said, in between meetings. And, you know, when we're not teaching mindfulness, Vicky and I are executive coaches, and a lot of that is about the quality of attention of the people that we are listening to. So to do short practices between meetings is really important. And other things we teach on Search Inside Yourself, which is like mindful walking. So you don't have to be sitting, attending to the breath. You can do mindfulness practices while you're walking from meeting to meeting to become more present, so that you can let go of the meeting you just come out of and become fully present in the meeting you're just going into. That ability to train your attention can have big payoff. So I'm conscious we're kind of at time, Sanj. I mean, you're please do make a call about, I mean, we're happy to take more questions if people need to dial off, you know, family commitments. We totally understand that.
I think there's 2 or 3 questions that had a kind of similar theme, that it might be quite good to kind of end on. Which was like kind of motivation, but also balancing work-life balance during lockdown. And I think there's quite a few people that have got families and, you know, struggling to give the time to their teams, to their own roles, but also to their family, and struggling a little bit with that guilt and that balancing everything. And I don't know if you have any tips to help some of the guys to manage that, and I guess feel less guilty and be able to manage their time a bit better.
So I think my immediate response is around the attitudinal quality that we train within mindfulness, which is around kindness, curiosity. So I know this particularly true to be true for my wife, but it's not just true for my wife, it's true for all of us that are parents, but anybody that's in a position of responsibility leading, which is we can try and be the perfect parent. And we can really make ourselves very unhappy by striving for perfection and just burning ourselves out. So one of the things around mindfulness is the opportunity to pause and to notice what's going on and to be kind. And it really matters. It really matters in terms of actually, I'm so exhausted, I just need to have an early night. I'm so exhausted, I just need to go and have a bath. I'm so exhausted, I just need to go and have a run. And when I come back, I can be a better husband, I can be a better father, I can be a better leader. Bottom line is if I'm really stressed out, I'm probably not very available to those around me. When I start to really take care of myself, I can be more available to my wife, to my children, to those team members, and that really matters. So, Vicky, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that in terms of just balancing work life and, you know, feelings of guilt, right? I mean,
yeah, I think that was really beautifully put. It made me think that, so, you know, the people who want my attention don't know less when I practice mindfulness than when I don't, but the quality of attention that I'm able to pay them through my practice is much better. So I don't feel as stressed, I don't feel as aggravated by all the demands on my time, because I'm a bit calmer and clearer. And I think the most important message that I want everybody to take away is don't use mindfulness practice as another thing to beat yourself up about. You know, if you have a day where you don't get to it, where you think as you go into bed, oh, you know, I didn't do any practice, don't beat yourself up with that, and know that you can actually do something called a body scan as a practice, which will actually help you fall asleep. So use it as something to help and be compassionate with yourselves more than anything else.
Nice little tip to end on there, I think. I'm just conscious that there's a few, I think we've had about 16, 17 questions in total. So as Mark said earlier, and I'm more than happy for, I think Mark shared his contact details, or reach out to Mark or Vicky via LinkedIn. If you have any unanswered questions, Mark and Vicky are more than happy to spend some time with you guys directly. You know, any kind of continued support that is required. We're hoping that this session is the first of many, and hopefully I'll be reaching out to you guys over the next few days just to get some feedback and find out what you'd be more interested in hearing about at the next session. Really hope you all got something from this. I know I certainly did. It's just finding the time to put it into practice now. But thank you everyone for your support. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, Zol.
Thank you.